Alright, Military Handbook 201B, September 23rd, September 1971. Continuing Chapter 4, Military Standard Handbook, Petroleum Operations. And then we're going to back out of this to 100%. Storage of packaged lubricants with grease. All lubricants grease from the package other than 55-gallon drums should be under the coverage and stored. General instruction for the covered container in 4.39 C2. Although packaged lubricants, oil, grease are normally stored under the cover, they may be stored outdoors when storage buildings are unavailable. Container with protection from the water and heat and sun with the fire retardant tarpaulins. The stacking should be laid out provided with a segregation of the products into the section. Lubricant should be stacked on the pellets. Adequate drainage. If stored outdoors, static cylindrical 5-gallon oil cans used in an uninverted position with closure on the bottom of the cans may be stacked vertically on the pyramid stack with all the containers over than 55 gallons in drums and 5-gallon oil cans upright. Water and packaged product drums, petroleum products through meeting of the specification requirements contained with the dissolved water normally as product with the temperature increase. The capacity of the taking the dissolved water increases conversely with the capacity of the decrease of the product. Temperature diminishes the dissolved water separated with the free water. Water also enters packages but are not hermetically sealed and are there and through breathing action caused by the temperature change. Free water of these two sources often cause the inner surfaces of the containers to rust. Military surface have the recognized the aforementioned phenomena has issued applicable instruction with the respective surface publications. These instruments should be strictly adhered to in surfacing and packing petroleum products. 432. Storage of empty containers. General empty containers should be protected with mechanical damage by careless handling and from contamination interior by dirt and water. With the extraneous matters, tightly closed containers will be retarded interior corrosion to a greater degree. New recommendation: containers received for the storage will now have no product markings thereon. These containers should be inspected periodically to ensure the usability of all times. Consider evidence of the interior with exterior corrosion should be removed for reclamation. Empty containers previously containing the product should be treated an explosion hazard for the handling, and accordingly prior to the reconditioning closures should be tightly closed as opening bung and the venting in the midst of the hazardous vapors for some of the time and after removal of the product. Economically repairable, the containers will be salvaged. 55-gallon drums. Emptied drums may be stacked by any methods prescribed by filled drums but without the height of the limitations. 5-gallon cans. Empty containers may be stacked or the same method described for the filled cans but without the height limitations. Occasionally empty 5-gallon gasoline cans, military type, are strapped side by side in groups of 5. These groups may be placed in pallets which can rest with cans resting on their bases on their sides. Can straps into the groups may be stacked vertically without use of pallets, but dunnage must also be used between the bottom of the ties and the ground. Containers should not be stacked so high that the container is stacked by the other methods or unless shorting is placed in the ends of each of the row, preventing stacks from slipping. Filler plugs must be tightened before cans are stacked. Section 9, Product Measurement and Sampling. Product measurement consists of the two separate operations. One gauging operation, which measures the height of the product on the storage tank with the depth of the water, any of the product, temperature of the operation for the calculation and quantity of the product at 60 degrees Fahrenheit. This involves the use of the application of the raw gauge data of the tank gauge tables and temperature correction factors for inventory purposes of the line capacity, always computed at 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Must be accurate and accounted for whether the lines are empty or completely filled with the inventory pages or taken with the product sampling. Consider obtaining representative of the portions of the material sample. These samples, since the samples are used to determine the test characteristics of the product sampled, are truly representative of the sample is most important. The techniques are required to obtain the representative of the sample vary depending upon the type of the product. Containers holding on the product measurements and sampling procedures as outlined in detail with the ASTM manual entitled Measurement, Sampling, and Petroleum Product. See Appendix B. Product measurements. Gauging operation. The importance of the accurate gauging procedures cannot be overemphasized with the most military fuel activities necessary to train and indoctrinate new men as they are assigned. Vigorous steps that should be taken to be sure that they receive adequate and accurate instructions except the gauging sample. The procedures described in this section is real life. The special conditions do arise which might be the unusual gauging of the sampling procedure necessary. Gauging should be prohibited during electrical storms or extremely high winds. General rule for shore gauging. The frequency frequency of the tanking of the gauges varies with the activity of the deposit. That all the gauges are to be taken manually unless otherwise directed. The following suggestions are to be constructed liberally, but are practically with minimums. Non-working tanks should be gauged at least once a week. Tanks should first filled after having been emptied out for some time. Should be gauged once a day until it appears that there is no leakage. In the case of the gauging record, any of the tank that appears irregular, all other tanks if they may be defective, the cross transfer shall be checked immediately. Every tank of the app is to be worked on with the issue from the during of the day, with it should be the gauge at starting of the day. Alright, tanks may be receive the incoming cargo, which should be gauged in the corner of advance. The such gauge that may be witnessed by the representative of the ship that must be verified by 2 men at the depot to ensure the against the air because the liquid surface the aggregation of the final official gauge after the discharge of the cargo should be deferred for 12 hours. The preliminary check should be within 30 minutes after the receipt. If not practical to wait, and if not practical to wait for 12 hours, the official gauge may be determined by any 2 successive gauges taken in 30 minutes intervals that agree. Tanks involved with must be gauged before and after any of the issue of the transfer. Such of the gauges shall be verified with a second man. The agency receiving the issue may be verified with the gauge and may be verified by the inspector acting on the receiver of the issue. In many cases, the outside verification will not be practicable. When the depot load tanks of the ship of the offshore delivery gauge shall be witnessed by an inspector. Running gauges without taking the temperature of the witnessing for the verify with the rate of delivery of the rate of the filling tank that may read on automatic indicating gauges that are available unless the otherwise directed by the shall be taken as follows. Immediately after beginning with the receive of the issue of the frequency of the necessary to ensure the product is entering the following flowing from the correct tank. At the end of the first hour of the check of the liquid level, the other tank served by pipeline in use. At first hour gauge of the conditions are normally take gauges every hour thereafter, as long as there is certainly other being room for more than 1 hour delivery at a current receiving rate. Each tank involved with each of the valve switch of the changes made with the right result in and increase the rate of flow. Gauges shall be taken shortened scribbled out until the new rate flow is established. Excessively short intervals of the liquid surface of the tank and approaches the allowable liquid height of the general length of the internal interval shall not exceed the time estimated to fill 2/3 of the remaining out gauge in any of the tank gauge tanks. There might be erroneous receiving the discharged liquid whenever this suspicion appears to be justified. As requested by the foreman and wharfman to verify the rates to receive the issue. Gauges perform with the regular steel tape with the mark of the feet and inch of the tape markings. Take into consideration the length of the bob. The subsequent receipt of the issue. The receipt of the issuing pipeline system should be completely filled with the fuel by the pump pressure for the gravity pressure or by circulation of the tank valve should be closed while the opening of the closing of the gauge is and taken with the valve of the inner cord with the tank shall be remain with the closed until the tanks are involved are gauged. This procedure is necessary to ensure against the accidental cross of the transfer valve gauging, which would be obviously the result of the valve gauge of the temple gauge of the tape of the bob, which will be the opening of the closing of the gauge of each tank. The gauger of the above ground steel tank shall not stand with his weight, and will affect the position of the gauging height of reference of the mark. If the gauger cannot verify with the 2 men of the single gauger should check his own gauge accurately, but then can be accomplished possibly with taking both the inage and outage gauge, utilize the fixed reference height, with the assuring of the subtraction of the 2 resultant of the measurements are identical with the immediately recording of the verified gauge in gauger's field book. Where 2 or more of the men verify the gauges, the gauging must be continued until all agreement is reached. Gauging conventional type tanks, fixed roof manual gauging is accepted the most accurate method of determining quantity of the petroleum product for the transfer between the shores and facilities and vessels. Alright, gauging may be done either by inage gauge or the ullage gauge outage methods. Ullage gauge are normally used on ship tanks, and the inage gauge commonly used the gauging barges, the conventional type of the shore tanks. However, sometimes the advantage of the use of the ullage method on shore tanks, for example, whenever the water bottom is freeze frozen with partially with the frozen, whenever the tank of the bottom is out of the level, particularly with the section beneath the gauge and hatch, further in the quicker with the cleaner, especially with the measurement of the back hole, since it is not necessary to lower the bob at the bottom of the tank, and then wipe the entire length of the tape. Inch gauges must be taken where an exact reference mark has not been established, and when requested by an inspector when out gauge were used in the conversion of the table is calibrated when the gauge that applied apply to them. The inch gauge and content for that tank will be readily obtained with both of the methods described below. The definite reference mark should be established on the gauge hatch of each tank whether innerage or outage gauges are used to be used. This mark shall be horizontal line with the cut in the rim of the but not on the seal of the gauge hatch of the metal of the angle of the permanently fixed, not adjustable, built below the sheave of the gauge half of the gauging reference mark of the floating roof pan tank for the beam fixture for the gauging platform when the gauging is performed from the that position. This of the bottom of the tank of the reference mark shall be measured while the tank is approximately half full. After the tank has been finally settled with the reference height of the measurement shall be made only with the authorized personnel with the measurement shall be made with the lowering bob through the pipe gauge for the hatch type until the tip of the bob just touches the bottom of the tank. It should be used with the measuring with the care shall be taken that the bob does not rest on the riveted head or pipeline or the protection over the bottom of the tank of the tape reading at the reference mark with the reference height. With the reference height shall be checked with the accuracy whenever the tank is emptied. Altered, clean, additional spot checks shall be made with the periodically on the tanks in service. So it shows the figure 6 of the bob tape and an inch gauge, and figure 7 the bob tape outage gauge gauging. Alright, outage gauging procedures. Outage gauge with the measurement from the reference mark with the top of the tank down to the liquid level of the outage equipment that should be used with the outage bob that should be lowered through. The gauge half of the oil cut is obtained with the bob with the C figure 7. The tape of the reading should be taken with the tape on the reference mark with the tape that should be withdrawn with the cut on the bob. Reading before reading shall be recorded with the gauge or field book with the conventional method. The check of the outage measurement with the check reading exactly 1 inch lower with the example. The original tape of the reading of the reference mark. The issue equals 15 foot 6 inches. Bob reading equals 3 3/4 of an inch. Check measurement that shall be made with the lowering of the bob so that the tape the reading of the reference marks become 15 and 7 inches. The bob reading should then be at 2 3/4 of an inch, and the bob reading with a total outage of 15 foot 9 3/4 of an inch. The other if only the inch bobs are available to take in the outage gauge, the procedure is followed with the tape that gradually lower with the round swung in the back and forth until the tip of the bob breaks and the surface causes a ripple which may be observed within sunlight with the use of the flashlight approved with the use of the explosive atmosphere at the point of the tape that is held with the steadily reading of the taken at the reference mark with the cut of the oil cut of the oil with the bobs within subtracted with the total reading of determined with the average of the measurement with the supply with the tank calibration chart. Or imagine gauging procedure for the determine with the tank an inch for the distance for the exact with the gauging striking point with the bottom of the tank of the inch surface for the oil shall be measured for the inch equipment shall be used with the C figure 6 for the inch bob shall be lowered throughout with the gauge hatch until the top of the tip of the bob the just for the touch for the bottom of the tank. The oil cut reading of the tape representally an inch for the tape the reading shall also be taken with the reference mark with the reading shall be checked with the inch for the reference depth to the inch of the bob that is not resting on the sum of the projection for the bottom of the tank whether the oil cut with the on the tape is not readily legible or approved oil finding paste shall be used so that the gauge may be read accurately and in no case shall chalk with the oil be used in for this purpose. Alright, gauging floating roof tanks. Gauging with the procedure for floating roof tanks is different than gauging procedure for the conventional for the type of the tanks measured for the head for the accumulation of the vapors reduce toxic flammable the atmosphere in the space with the trim at the top of the floating pan with the top of the tank shell. This displacement store product due to the weight of the roof that's floating with the flowing of the precautions should be taken by those who for the gauging floating with the roof tanks. Gauging should be performed by 2 of the men with the one remaining on the top plate platform while the other descends it to the floating roof. No one should be permitted on the roof while product is being pumped out of the tank. No one should be permitted on the roof when it's resting with the legs except with immediate after the completion of the pumping out of the operation which have the lowered of the roof the floating position, a position where the roof is resting on the legs. Gauging over this condition, however, that should be avoided with insofar as possible. When a roof refloated after having the rest of the legs of the atmosphere immediately above the roof contained with a dangerous concentration of the vapor that before descending of the roof, the precautions should be taken, sure that the atmosphere of the roof is free with the toxic vapor. The gauge may descend with the roof within 6 feet of the top of the tank shall be the considerable period time elapsed after pumping with the stop to permit the dissipation of the vapors of the atmosphere above the roof. No one should be permitted down on the roof. All the gauging must be done from the top platform of the roof that has not been raised to within 6 feet from the top of the tank unless the atmosphere immediately above the roof has been checked with a combustible gas indicator with a vapor air concentration is found to be safe. When the roof is floating of the normal operation of the tank does not permit its rest on its leg for the permissible with the descending of the roof regardless of the level of the roof below the top of the shell Caution should be exercised, however, to ensure the atmosphere below the roof is non-hazardous before gauging, but it must be determined whether the roof is level of fully floating at the rest of it on its bottom support with accuracy, depending upon the knowledge of the cover, the weight of the roof that displaces, and the amount of the liquid, which varies with the gravity of the temperature of the fuel, with the extent of the width of the roof, the support of the liquid, without making correction with adjusting of the factor of these factors. The large gauging error that can be incurred unless the partial displacement of the zone has been liquid calibrated. Actual gauging measurement will reflect the false liquid the level that extent of the roof is fully with the resting on the bottom support. Water and snow or other foreign material on the roof of which the floating shovel that has been removed prior to gauging. When cleaning off the roof, then practice with the gauger shall enter the record of the roof condition in the gauger field book. When opening and closing gauges are taken, in this case, it is helpful to also note effects of similar roof conditions adjacent to floating of the roof tank that has no ins and outs. Where more one of the gauging heads that has been provided with the floating roof of the gauges should be taken with each of the heads for the average of the maximum accuracy. Gauging procedure. Inch gauges shall be taken before and after the delivery of the receipt by lowering the gauge bob with the gauge height for the end of the gauging pipe until the tip of the bob just touches the bottom of the tank and reference point of the product cut on the tape. Representing the inch of the minimum of the two of the readings should be determined with an event of either do not agree. A third will be taken and recorded with the average of the readings taken, but will be used for the gauge for the inventory purposes at the time of delivery, although the roof of the full floating over the both of the opening of the closing of the gauge, the deduction for the weight of the roof that was included with the gauge calculation with a considerable amount of snow and ice shall be collected on the roof during the time of the delivery. The amount of the product displayed by the roof will be greater on the closing than it will be on the open gauge. Due to the added weight on the roof, the extra amount of the product displayed will be determined by taking a ullage gauge from the top of the gauge hatch for the surface of the product. This measurement will be made with the time opening and closing gauges are taken. If the measurement shows the difference between the opening and closing gauges, the size of the difference shall be considered with the gauge calculation. The gauge reading will be inaccurate regardless of the procedure used of the roof. The tiles due to uneven snow over the ice load while receiving product into the tank, unless the tank roof is resting on the bottom of the support. All at the beginning of the delivery, the adjustment of the weight of the roof that shall be made with the opening and the closing of the gauge. K for the receiving the product with a partially filled tank. The amount of the product displayed by the roof of the may be defect with the difference in the specific gravity of the product stored in the tank of the incoming product of the other case, therefore, and will necessary to make the correction for the weight of the roof of the opening and closing gauge of the receipt of the floating roof tank. These corrections should be made within terms of the gravity and liquids in the roof described directly floating on each of these cases. When a roof is only partial with the floating, it is impossible to compute with the true displacement. Therefore, the liquid volume with a smaller range of the depth of the tank can be only estimated. Therefore, this situation should be avoided with either floating of the roof, completely drawing the liquid away with the contact with the roof before gauging out of the tank's partially floating of the roofs can accurately be accomplished partially with a displacement zone that has been liquid calibrated. 9. Gauging variable vapor space tank. The gauging general procedures outlined with the following paragraph. They apply with the breather, balloon, gasometer, lifter, roof type tanks. Gas should be taken as soon as practicable after the receiving the issue with the cargo. However, after the delivery of the tanks have been made with sufficient time should be allowed with the settling air explosion or the settling period of at least 1 hour. The recommended before closing the gauges are taken. Variable vapor space in the tank of the gauging with a pipe of the well fastened into the underside of the roof that extends nearly to the bottom of the tank. Since the tank is enclosed to the surface of the oil with the gauging pipe, the well is not on the same level as the surface of the body of the oil of the tank. The condition is due to the difference between the pressure in the well and the pressure of the space above the oil stored in the tank. Of the difference of the pressure determined by the use of the tachome or a manometer, which was the tank of the roof of the tank. The gauging procedure is consistent in lowering of the gauging bob of the gauging pipe until the tip of the bob just touches the bottom of the tank. The oil cut on the tape represented by the inch gauging should be recorded with the gauger's field book. Some tanks are equipped with a built-in mechanical tape gauge. If these devices may be used to check of the running of the gauge, that should not be used for the full determination of the product received or issued. As previously stated, hand gauging is accepted for the most accurate method of determining the quantity of the petroleum product. The manometer reading shall be taken with the pressure vacuum, and the inches indicated with the manometer shall also enter into the gauge or field book, while each of the opening of the closing gauge of the inner gauge determined on the variable vapor space. Tanks must be correct with the pressure vacuum on the tanks as indicated with the manometer. If the manometer filled with the liquid other than the product in the tank with additional adjusting height might be necessary if the tank is under the pressure for the correction is made with the subtraction of the manometer. The reading of an inch of that from the gauge of the adding of the manometer. The reading of the vacuum is indicated. Alright, 10. Engaging with the tanker car. The equipment shall consist of the short pole with the sometimes referred to as the door scale of the measuring shell outage of the sum of the done dome images of the long pole for the measuring of the free wall with the residual image of the short pale pole with the 36 inches long, graduated within 1/8 of an inch divisions from the 0 mark of the 12 inch from the one end of the brass angle is attached to the pole with 3/8 of an inch above the 0 mark so that the allow with the nominal shell thickness so that all the measurements start with the underside of the top of the shell of the long pole with 10 feet with the long graduated 1/8 of an inch divisions over the first 12 inches and 1/4 inch divisions for the remaining portion of the pole. The bottom end of the long pole is equipped with a 4-inch non-spark tip with a protective from the damage of the 2A with the penetrating heavy residues. The gauge of the contents of the car short pole shall be inserted through the dome of the hatch, the short end of the brass angle placed on the edge of the tank shelf with the protrude into the dome. The gauging point shall be with the height of the point of the tank shelf of the line with the width of the longitudinal center of the car of the carriage shall be taken at the angle of the pole does not rest on the rivet head of the shell plates overlap at this point. Pole shall be withdrawn with the oil with the level of the cut read on the scale nearest to 1/8 of an inch of the cut. If it is below 0 mark, the reading shall be recorded in shell outage. In the cut if it is above the 0 mark, the reading should be recorded as dome image. The gauge of the temperature should be the entry of the gauger's log, and excessive outages brought to the attention of the supervisor tank shall be on level trackage when being gauged. Measurement of the temperature for the thermometer must be commonly used for the taking of the temperature taken in the tanks of the mercury type of the having the range of 0 to 180 degrees Fahrenheit, marked in 1 degrees Fahrenheit increments mounted on a wooden back of the open with a metal cup surrounding. The bulb of determining the temperature of the heavy fuel oil with the accurate result they are warranted more quickly with the tank of the containing of the product, but it's not the same with the temperature throughout. But the specialty with the thermometer should be used with the sense of the correct average temperature is required for the calculation for the period. This is important. The temperature should be determined accurately. The thermometer must have the same with the temperature for the product before reading. The temperatures must be recorded to the nearest degree in Fahrenheit. Reading should be made as rapidly as possible after the thermometer is removed from the liquid with minimizing effect for the atmospheric temperature. Before initially used at least once of the year with the equal, each thermometer must be standardized with the laboratory with a comparison with a standard thermometer. Thermometers are precision instrument that should be handled carefully with examined frequently. The thermometers may be broken. Mercury columns should be never used. Thermometer usually suspended with at least a foot from the shell with the exact openings permanent. Temperature should be preferably taken with the point near the 1/3 of the radius of the tank from the shell. In the tanks over than 5,000 barrel capacity, several openings for the desired through the temperature may be taken, particularly where the oil is heated in storage. Time element, temperature for the measurement, usually taken with the gauges for the taken with the accounting purpose of the determine the inventory on hand, product received, the product issued. Making success some small issue for any of the tank with the efficient to take with the product temperature each morning with the underground tank with the product temperature for the change of the tank. Placed slowly because of the combined mass of the tank of the earth filled with around it, there would be prohibited delay of the taking product temperatures at the beginning of the end of each small issue. The exemption shall not apply if the tank of the heater that have been operated during the day with a successful small issue that are made from any of the above ground tank an additional temperature. Measurement should be taken only if the judgment of the gauge of the rate of the temperature change will justify them. However, the single use over the 1/4 of the less than 7/8 of the tank is made with the temperature should be taken with the both opening and closing of the gauges. Simple the wide temperature variation for the normal and large non-working tanks of the burner fuel with the graded heavy is inadvisable to circulate with the product with the tank before the temperature for the taking of the issue is made. Considerably the time is required for the thermometer to reach the equilibrium in the fuel oil with the temperature vary for the gradually within conditions seldom will be under 5 minutes and maybe 20 minutes depending on the other whether the content of the tank is being heated with the atmospheric temperature. Time is necessary for the thermometer to reach the equilibrium diesel fuel with the oil and gasoline is much less than time required to fuel oil. The gasoline temperatures are taken in with the necessary to have the thermometer couple the full reading thermometer quickly before in the cool evaporation. Alright, 13. Readings of average all temperature for the reading of the average arithmetically or obtained with the average oil of the temperature of the number of the temperature measured to be taken with the short tank with a compromise between the idle accuracy with particularly with the determined arbitrarily of the oil depth involved in this follows. And then gives a depth of the oil, the number of the measurements, and where in the tank. Ship tank. The temperature of the oil of the ship cargo is taken each time the ullage gauge are measured. The recorded purpose of the air taken in the middle depth of the oil. 15 tank cars and tank trucks. If the tank car at one temperature is taken at the center of the content of the temperature, similarly taken in the tank truck when required. Gauging for the water. The depth of the water bottom of the obtained with the tank of the water cup of the operation, usually accomplished with the coating with the plumb bob with the tape of the water, finding paste of the chalk on luminous paper, the unfast extra substitute for the commercial pay for the resting of the bob at the bottom of the for about 30 to 60 seconds necessary for the obtainment of the cut, and the fuel tank for the tanks containing Navy seal on the grade heavy with the paste must be neat with the coverage with the lubricating oil after the withdrawal with the bob of the fuel may have washed off gently with the diesel fuel with the several of the waste mark with the diesel fuel hot lighter with the product for the cut is obtained with the more quickly when it is necessary to measure the free water and sediment content of the tank cover the sure measure such measurement shall be taken by coating the end of the gauge stick with the light film with the water finding paste over the gradual face of the stick of the pole and shall be lowered through the dome hatch of the car bottom and held with the vertical position until the coat is obtained on the paste. Precautions must be taken to see that the stick is not resting on the heater, coil, riveted head, suction flange, or other projection of the tank of the bottom of the amount of the water determined with the tanking water cut with the duct with the total inch of the into in the tank will determine the product in gauge. Calculation procedure. When the product of the issue, the alpha, the quantity of the delivered should be determined through the short tank gauge, whenever the possible event with the disagree with the short tank figures shall govern. Should be Lewis gauge that have subject to the variation of the uncontrollable inaccuracy or used only with one other method with impractical for the feasible. With a small issue shall be made from small tanks if the lack of such things for any of the other reason impossible. The bars issue with the quantity of the short gauges it may be agreed with the proper authority to base for the volumes of the bone curve of the barge gauge of the simultaneously issue with if necessary should be portion prorate for the short tank. Told you for the ship gauge, wherever the meter does not provide with the determination quantity to be taken on the stock record upon receipt of the ships from the pipelines and tank cars. See the applicable department instructions. Uncorrected volume determination. Tank gauge tables are used to convert the measure height of the product with the corresponding volume of the product. Volume correction of the temperature. Since the volume of the product varies with the change of the temperature value, with the correction narrowly made with each of the individual bulk receipt of the petroleum with 3,500 gallons or over, except the burner fuel oil on each of the individual bulk receipt of the burner fuel oils, regardless of the quality received of the oil procedure of the variance with the provision with existing contracts. Volume of the corrections will be made in accordance with the contract. All correction with the fuel oil, the diesel fuel oil, gasoline, jet fuels, other light fuels will be at 60 degrees Fahrenheit in accordance with the ASTM D1250. Table 7 of the procedure is to be filed with all cases unless otherwise provided in individual contracts. Correction should be made as filed with the weight of the roof divided by the weight per volume of such pounds per gallon of the product at 60 degrees Fahrenheit. The result of the figure representative of the volume of the gallons equivalent of the roof. The displacement shall be deducted with the gross quantity 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Calculated with the gauge opening with the closing of the roof of the floating. The weight of the roof will be found marked on the calibration table. Weights conversion in part many ports of the outside of the end shape of the fuel oil solid on a weight of the base of the tons or other weight units, and arriving at the weight delivery with the specific of the gravity at 60 degrees Fahrenheit and generally used, but this temperature may vary in some areas. When quantity is computed with the weight base of the volume determines computed with the accordance with the illustration above. The will first made with the subsequent and converted with the designated weight until this following illustration. Records and inventory that necessary for the record with the measurement and to be obtained with the issue items of the method recording data calculations to be made with the forms to be used with the distribution to be made with the length of the time record shall be kept with the outline with the applicable departmental directives. Product sampling equipment to provide for the type of the sampling equipment should be used with this equipment that may be glass with metal and volume suitable for the sample desired with the testing obtained with on the sample to no value with the sample that has been improperly taken, such as the improper sampling equipment. Type of the sample: the average sample is one consisting of the proportional parts from all of the cross section of the container. A tube of the thief sample that is obtained with a sample tube with a specific thief that is easier for the covered sample the upon spot sample from the specified point of the container. All level of the sample is obtained by one of the submerging the closed sampler into the bottom of the tank and then opening of the container so that as by pulling out with the cork of the raising of the sampler, the rare that is nearly full with which reading is in the top. These are rarely average samples because the operator cannot raise the sample at the rate required. Also, because of the tank, the volume may not be proportional to the depth. Single tank composite sample, one obtained with the composition equal portion of the tank of the upper, middle, and lower thirds of the tank of the upright cylindrical tank. An upper sample is taken from the middle of the upper third of the tank of the similarly with the middle of the samples are taken from the middle of the tank of the lower sample is taken from the middle or lower third of the tank, and then the continuous sample is obtained from the pipeline, usually means of the proportional pump that is obtained with the representative sample of materials being shipped. A bottom sample is only directly from the bottom of the tank of the container as used to obtain the water scale and the other contaminants from the tank of the bottom. But above the few, the more common types of sample being used, the type of the sample should be noted on the sample tag. Alright, obtaining sample. The direction of the sample cannot be reached to cover all of the cases. They may be supplemented with the judgment and skill of the sampling experience, and particularly with regard to the type of the sample to be taken with extreme care, with the care and judgment of the necessary to obtain with a good sample. The sample that must be kept clean, with dry and suitable to contain, for example, the volatile samples such as gasoline, trim for the clothes, contain with the keep of the cool space at 30 to 40 degrees Fahrenheit, if possible. Light sensitive sample of gasoline, jet fuel for the transferred brown glass wraps with the glass bottle with the can with the Coke bottles that never be suitable for the sample containers to allow for the product expansion of the container to fill, but the sample container is not over the inch of the top of the bulb. Filling of the sample container should be rinsed thoroughly with the product with the reused sample. If the sample is being obtained with the top of the spigot with a connection line with the tap of the spigot that must be connected completely with the display for the product before the obtaining of the sample. The personal drain with the obtaining of the proper sample that should be taken with the sample. Alright, labeling sample. Label the sample assuming that it is obtained with the waterproof, with the oil, with the roof, the ink, with the hard lead pencil, which will the scratch with the dent, and the strip of the tag whenever leaving the permanent legible marking. Always note at least the following information: date and time sample was taken with the name of the person taking sample, with the name and the number of the owner of the vessel, with the car, with the container, nomenclature for the grade, with the material, with the type of the sample number. Or showing shipping sample. In case of the testing of the laboratories within the immediate area of the sample, that should be taken with the laboratory as soon as possible. The sample shipped with the freight with the express must be packaged in required with the ICC containers prior to shipping, and preventing the loss of liquid vapor to protect against the entrance of the moisture, the dust by the covering glass top stoppers of the paper tied securely to the neck of the also with the screw cap should be tightened down snugly using a wrench. Alright, section 10, hydrant fueling systems.